Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Chinstroker versus Punter. Long-time listeners will know that we are big fans of the 1990s science fiction series Babylon 5, and lucky enough to be joined by a couple of the actors from that show, namely Patricia Tallman, who played the character of Lyta Alexander in the show, and Claudia Christian, who played Susan Ivanova. We have a pretty good conversation about their acting careers, as well as a little bit of specific stuff around Babylon 5, and also have conversations about some of the work that they do outside of acting, namely in the case of Patricia Tallman, her nerd tourism. I'm not sure what the more politically correct term is there. And we also have a conversation with Claudia Christian around her advocacy work and her non-profit organisation around treatment for alcoholism. On that, I don't claim to be any kind of medical expert, so it probably wouldn't be appropriate of me to neither decry nor endorse any specific treatment. So as I think we mentioned in the interview, if you're going to look into any treatment, then speak to your GP first. Make sure that you do the thing that is right for you. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to have Patricia Tallman on first, have a conversation about her career, and then we will have Claudia Christian as well. So enjoy, and we will be back with a regular episode in the next week or so.
Damn good coffee. And hot. 10 years! 10 years! 10!
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Friday! I won't be. You will!
No, don't.
Yes! 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 Yes!
They are without honor.
I am the law.
Who's that coming over the hill? Is it Chinstroker versus Punter? Who's that coming over the hill? Is it Chinstroker versus Punter? Who's that coming over the hill? Is it Chinstroker versus Punter? Who's that? Yes, they're over the hill.
Hello everybody, I'm flying solo for this bonus episode, so Paul is not with me. However, I think that we have more than compensated for this with a very special guest, actress, stunt performer and adventure mentor. We'll get into what that means in due time. Patricia Tallman, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
As I say, thanks again for agreeing to give up some of your valuable time to join me for the show. Both my absent co-host and I are big fans, so this is a real thrill. Now, before we start talking about the careers that you're most known for, I wanted to talk about your current work as an adventure mentor and the New Zealand trip that you're involved in. Just to sort of transition into that, I'm a displaced Brit living in Wellington, so I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your previous New Zealand experiences and relate it to your upcoming trip.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for bringing this up because it's something I'm so excited about. I decided I wanted to take a little more charge of my life and create something that I loved doing. And traveling is, of course, something I love. But what really sparks me is going to the places that have been in books that I love, like Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings. I'm a huge nerd. And so I want to go where I haven't seen something special from these experiences that I had in my mind in these wonderful books. So I've done London. I did a Harry Potter Sherlock kind of magical trip in London and going into the dark underground and more scary places and spooky haunted things. And that was a blast. We've gone to Hawaii, which is completely different. I've done a bunch in Hawaii. I love the island, but there's the main island, the big island, but it's also nerd related, which I won't go into because we're talking about New Zealand. Okay, so New Zealand was this huge bucket list thing for me. And I found my way over there in 2017 and in 2018. So I took two trips. The first trip, I did the whole country, and I just did as many Lord of the Rings excursions as I could. And with not only did I want to have this experience for myself, but I had in the back of my mind that I would really love to do an adventure, lead an adventure, guide people on this quest throughout New Zealand. The books are phenomenal, but the movies picked out like some of the most beautiful places in New Zealand, some places that even New Zealanders didn't know about, I've come to find out, because Peter Jackson took helicopters to private land and places that wasn't accessible. And, so you really get to see something of New Zealand that just, for me, it feels like this huge opening in my heart. Like when I see these images and the backgrounds of these films, and I knew I had to go. So I did this massive trip in 2017 all by myself, and I loved it.
I was having a look at the sort of the package that you do for this, and the thing that I thought was interesting was, firstly, you're absolutely right. You make reference to locations I didn't know about, and I'm a geek who's been living in New Zealand for 5 years, so it doesn't take a genius to figure out that I've visited a few of these places. But also, I think that it's interesting. I think that one of the appeals, aside from the fact that it's just a great excuse to go and visit these beautiful places, is the fact that we live now in a time where so many film environments are created through green screen, that it's really refreshing to actually have something tactile, something that you can actually touch and inhabit, which is becoming less common now. And I think that perhaps one of the big appeals for your trip really kind of taps into that.
You're absolutely right. That's an amazing point you just made, because even when you do like a Game of Thrones tour, whether it's in, Ireland or Spain or in Iceland, you have to imagine all the green screen that they did to it, because they've used a little wee portion of it and then they've added in so much, which is still awesome. But in New Zealand, it really is that. It looks like that. Yeah. The only thing they may have done is put the gates to Helm's Deep into the mountain. Yeah. That's it. The mountain really looks like that.
And I suppose also getting to experience those environments with like-minded people as well is a really appealing sort of element.
Oh, well, thank you. I was kind of off on why it was a passion for me, but that's absolutely true. And I actually had to come back to New Zealand because there was a portion of the trip I couldn't quite figure out how to do. So that's why I came back in 2018. And now it's all dialed in. So it's on the website. The itinerary is there. And there's several points I like to make. This is an expensive trip. It's an expensive trip because it's private. And it's guided. It's just me and my guide, and we have a private luxury Mercedes van, and we have
most people are only going to do it once, so if you're going to do it once, do it right, hey?
If you're going to get all the way over there, right, you want to see everything and you want to do everything, and I am really, really proud of what I've put together, and I really want to share it with people, so I'm hoping I'm about halfway full there. I can still take another 7-8 people, so... I actually have a Kiwi on the trip because he looked at it and went, "Oh my God, that's everything I've always wanted to do, and this sounds amazing." Yes, I'm in. So I'm very proud.
We sometimes forget about what's on our doorstep. So where can I just? I'm pretty sure we've got listeners who are going to be interested in this. I'm just wondering how they can find you. What the best place for them to start, sort of online, would be to looking into this.
Yeah, just go to questretreats.com. So QUESTRETREATS. And then it says retreats, and you click on it, and New Zealand is right there, or down in the page, it's right there. So you can see everything that we're doing. But I think you don't even have to be a massive Lord of the Rings fan to love this trip, because like I said, and you mentioned, we're seeing all the most beautiful spots of the country as we move our way down from the tip of the North Island all the way down to Queenstown and the South Island.
Wow, I see. Yes, you're doing both islands.
I'm doing both. That's why it's a long trip. It's 16 days, and it's, that's why it is what it is. So I tell you what, I'll give some special treatment to anybody who's listening to this podcast and who is a fan of yours, and they want to contact me. All the information's on the website, and just mention this trip, and I'll do something special for you.
Awesome.
I just thought of that off the top of my head.
Wonderful stuff. Thinking on your feet. I like this. You should be a podcaster. One thing I wanted to just point out to listeners just before we move on from this is that there's for people who've perhaps done location tours before, one thing I think very much, and I say this very much as a somewhat of an outsider culturally, is that one of the great things about New Zealand, particularly when it comes to visiting the Lord of the Rings locations, for example, Matamata, where the full Hobbit villages.
Yeah.
This isn't a velvet rope culture. This isn't a stand behind the lines. This is a when I went there, because I visited a couple of years ago, my expectation was that we were going to get there and everything was going to be roped off and you were going to be looking at things through glass. And it was literally some dude in mud boots just going, yeah, just, go, help yourselves, do what you want. We were touching things, we were having our photographs taken, peering around the doors. Yep. It's a very hands-on sort of inviting atmosphere.
And we're doing the banquet tour at night. So we have the tour, and then as the lights are going down, the lights are coming up in the Shire, in the homes, and then we end up in the Green Dragon, and then we have a massive feast. It's phenomenal.
Oh, amazing! I'm so jealous. I mean, the other thing as well, I think that's interesting about the Hobbit Village is everything is geographically correct. It's not like you've got a shooting location over here. It's when you're standing in front of Bilbo's house, you can see the pub off where it should be. You can see houses over here, the trees behind it. So it really is a transformative experience to be there, and that's just one of the stops.
And I feel this is me getting a little woo-woo, but I feel like New Zealand has what Hawaii has, which is that it's a very spiritual place to be. You just feel a vibe when you're there, and when you can get outside of a town and you're in the countryside, like when we go to the Hobbit location at in Harryfeet, or if you go in Queenstown, or like you were saying, when you go to Lothlorien or you go to Rivendell, you feel something. And that's what I want people to experience. When we go to Tongariro, we're going to be hiking out into the mountains a little bit, into the woods around the mountains, and you just feel something. That's what I want. And you can do that in New Zealand. You can't really do that in so many other places.
Yeah, absolutely.
They just are overdeveloped. Yeah.
Very, 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 very good stuff.
It's beautiful.
Okay, so I was really just move on to talking about your, as I say, the careers that you're more sort of well known for at this point, at least. Clearly, Patricia, you've become synonymous with the genres of horror and science fiction, including a pretty close association with the late George Romero. With Knight Riders, Monkey Shines, Creepshow 2, the Savini directed Night of the Living Dead, which I'd be very keen to come back to again in a moment. I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about this relationship and collaboration.
Well, the first time I met George, I was auditioning for Knight Riders, and I was just out of college. I mean, I was 21, and I was so nervous to audition, but he couldn't have been just a more gentle soul, just a very sweet man. And I ended up getting the role and playing Julie Dean in this movie. And it was such a blessing for me to have this kind of a kind, gentle, collaborative energy to have my first on-set experience as an actor. So I really credit George with giving me confidence, experience, and we got the crew, we were all very close. So I understood how it worked, and that's what I think is so important. It's missing so many times with people, with actors who get on a set. If you don't have the experience, you don't know what you're doing and you feel awkward and you don't have the confidence. And I'm so blessed that I had that.
I'd imagine that's even more the case with television as well, because particularly if you're a guest star, you're plugging into this production line.
Yes, exactly right. You're plugging in, and there's an energy already happening. They already have a way of working, and you need to be able to fit into the gears. You can't be, obstructing the flow in any way. So yeah, it's a skill.
I mentioned the Savini directed, the sort of the Romero produced Living Dead. One of the great, I think, underrated horrors. I think largely due to the fact that it was a remake, and I think a sort of unfair, somewhat sneery attitude that people have when they lump all remakes together. But I just wanted to mention that you're. I mean, this is the first thing that I remember seeing you in and thinking, oh, okay, who's this person? Because I think that your performance and character really deserve to be regarded alongside, Sigourney and Linda Hamilton for the great sort of early female ass kickers, and the journey that character goes through. That must have been a big deal for you at the time, I'd imagine.
Huge. You're so insightful. It was huge for me. And in fact, when I first started hearing that George was doing this remake, and I knew the reasons why, but I just thought, oh, why would you do that? And I wasn't interested in that role because I didn't want to Judi Day is amazing in the first one. Judith O'Dea, she's incredible. So why reinvent the wheel? I didn't want to go up against that. But when I saw the script finally, and Tom just kept saying, Patty, read the script. And then I saw, oh my gosh, there's this transition. And then I could be what I've always wanted to be, which is sort of an action adventure heroine. And you weren't seeing that back then, right? I grew up, I left school in 79, and so I worked all through the 80s. And women were still, running downstairs in their underpants with a candle in the middle of a storm when you know what I mean? It's like, What the hell? And of course they're getting murdered right, left, and center. And I made a great living doubling these ladies as a stunt person. So I'm very grateful, but I didn't want to do that as an actor. I didn't want to perpetuate that trope, so I was really grateful that George I
think the key moment in that film from a performance perspective is the moment where you make that switch, where your character almost decides, look, I'm going to turn this PTSD into something that's working for me, and I think that it's very easy to underestimate the skill. This isn't really just a question here. I'm just blowing smoke. I think it's good.
I like it.
I think it's really easy to underestimate the difficulty in being able to make that switch, being able to sell the vulnerability, but then at the same time be convincing as an ass kicker once you make that switch. And I would imagine it was very satisfying for you as an actor to be able to play both sides of that coin.
Absolutely. I got to do that on Babylon 5 too, I think. But I love that. I love that being a normal person, just a school teacher type lady, and then having this horrendous thing happen where the dead are walking again. And how the hell do you deal with that? And you're right. I think that it's pretty clear in the script where Barbara starts to go, these guys aren't going to protect me enough. There's too much infighting. Nobody's got anybody else.
You want something done properly, you got to do it yourself, haven't you?
Exactly.
I'm guessing that that casting played a part in your Babylon 5 casting. I mean, I'd have thought that would have got you noticed. Is that? Tell me a little bit about that process, that transition to the pilot of Babylon 5.
I was in the room getting ready to audition for the pilot for Babylon 5, the character of Lyta. And I didn't expect to get it because it was such a good part. I thought they're going to give it to a star, it's a pilot. They're going to have to load it with star power, so that's fine. But I got to do, I get to audition today. I get to act, so I look at it like this is a chance to go work out and have a great time. And I'm by myself in this little office, and over in the corner is another actor. We're both, when you go to audition, you don't hang out. You're focused on the task ahead, and you're trying to stay in your A game. And I'm kind of running lines in my head. He's running lines in his head. And there's an inner door to the office where the auditions are happening. And this huge black shadow filled up the whole doorway. And I hear this voice say, Patricia Tallman. I said, yes. He said, my name's Joe Straczynski. I wrote the part for you. Good luck. And he disappears.
Wow.
And the other actor in the room goes, no pressure, huh? I kind of really don't remember the rest of the audition.
It's like going for a job interview and then having the person who interviews come over and greet the person next to you with their secret fraternity handshake. And
right. Yeah, exactly. I was, So he had seen Night of the Living Dead and liked, I think, just what you were talking about, that combination of being vulnerable and yet having an inner core that can come through of strength. And that's what he was looking for Lyta.
And it's a really prominent role. Yeah. I mean, I've recently introduced my wife to Babylon 5. We've just finished a watch and she's now more obsessed with it than I was. It's incredible. I've created a bit of a monster here. And she's not even really a sci-fi person. She was just really struck by the storytelling and the character stuff. But I mean, it's a pretty, rewatching it, it's actually a pretty prominent role in the pilot. I mean, it's almost... Because you're the new character, you're almost the perspective character in that pilot. And I'm just wondering, I mean, the obvious question being, you didn't come back for the weekly show initially, at least. What happened there, Patricia?
Oh, yeah. So this is kind of an interesting story. It's a very Hollywood story. I'll condense it. There's a long ramp up to it, but basically the deals were being made for the series once we found out it was picked up. This was about a year. We made it. It took about a year.
Yeah, there was a gap, wasn't there?
There's a big gap, and it turns out there was somebody that had a romantic interest in me who was now one of the suits at Warner Brothers. And I had rejected him. And my people around us know these stories. We know who it is and all of it. He has since crashed and burned. But at the time, he came. He was one of the suits from Warner Brothers that came to watch us do a final audition as a cast. And I just was like, shit. Yeah. You know? And he did. He grenaded it for me. And he made it as miserable and awful as possible, too. He made it, dragged it out to the last minute, just, really just like sticking it to me. And he waited till Joe, this is back now, we're talking in 1993. So this is back before we all had cell phones. We still had pagers. Yeah. And, we didn't have this instant communication. Joe had gone to New York for some business, and they waited till he was out of town. Recast the part with Andrea Thompson. They wanted somebody sexier. They just kept saying I wasn't sexy enough, and grenaded it for me. So anyway,
fortunately, sons of bitches like that are getting weeded out now.
Well, hopefully, it's coming to a head in the United States. Not to talk politics, but we can see that there's a lot of creepy people around, and that hopefully this is going to make a huge change. Yeah. But at the time, and then they told Joe that I'd asked for 5 times of the salary that, which was a complete lie. They just lied. Yeah. So however, they didn't realize that I actually had a friendship with Joe. We all did. The cast, once we auditioned, we had a whole year to wait. So Joe had us doing conventions.
Oh, awesome. Was that your first experience with conventions, or had you done them through your horror work before?
Right. I had done some with the horror work. So his was a little more specific to sci-fi, but his crowd. So we went around, some of us, there'd be a couple of us for each of the shows. Different actors would go with him, but we all had phone numbers and stuff. So we were talking behind the scenes, and we knew what was going on. And I just called Joe. I was hysterical and crying, and I just, spent a year promoting this show and just said, they've done this to me. And he said, well, they told me you asked for this amount of money. I said, I asked for the same money that I did the pilot for. And he was like, oh my God. So when Andrea decided she wanted to leave Babylon 5, he just called me up right away and said, do you want to come back? And I'm like, let me think. Yes. And he made it happen.
So what was just to go back to the pilot for a moment, what was your experience like making that? I'm just wondering, a lot's been made. I don't know if this was the case from the pilot. I don't know how differing the production circumstances were between the pilot and the TV show, but a lot's been made about the sort of the frugality of the production of Babylon 5. Yes. The fact that it was very much small scale, certainly compared to what I would imagine your experiences with Star Trek were. What were your experiences like on the pilot? Was it like, oh my God, what an incredible production, or was it, oh my God, I can't believe that they're making this here, or was it somewhere in the middle? What were your initial feelings when you made the Gathering?
Well, the Gathering, the what am I trying to say? The main thing about the Gathering is the script. The script is so bloody good. Yeah. It's really good, right? And the difference even I, with my limited experience, reading that script was like, oh my God, this is so good. So the budget that we had to work with, we had a wonderful director, Richard Compton, and there were some good key people in place. The actors were amazing, but the production was really bare bones, and they made it look amazing when they shot it. They made it look better. Believe me, in person, it didn't look that good.
I'm guessing that one of the things that I noticed from a filmmaking perspective, and this is a great genre tradition, the British Hammer films used to do this a lot, where everything looked great and opulent when the camera was static, but if you move the camera 2 foot this way, there'd be nothing. It was very much, if it's in the frame, it's there and it's crammed in and it's looking great, but there's nothing outside that. I would imagine it was similar to that somewhat.
Exactly. And even they had puppets for aliens, we were in the alien sector, and it just wasn't, I was like, oh, are we in a Muppet show, or are we in a serious sci-fi show in space? You know what I mean? There was some stuff, but they did such a great job with lighting and atmosphere that it covered a multitude of sins.
When you came back, when Andrea left the show, was it initially a recurring, or was the intention, as it was described to you, always that you were going to come back as a regular? What was that sort of, I suppose, that interim period?
Because if you had booked me as a what's the word, as a regular character, or as a cast regular, it would have had to go through Warner Brothers and that same guy again.
Yeah.
So to avoid that.
Oh, so he was still there then at this point?
Yes.
Oh, right, okay.
In fact, during the Christmas party, he came up to me at the Babylon 5 Christmas party and he said, "How did you get back on this show?" I mean, he was so threatening and awful.
Wow. Merry Christmas.
It was like, yeah, Merry Christmas. And I was like, I didn't move. You know, I just did.
The good will out. What can I say?
Yeah, right. So that was how Joe flew it under the radar. We didn't need Suits approval for guest stars, et cetera. And he just kept bringing me back in. And then I think by the third season, I was a recurring and then a regular. And he just kind of was able to skip.
Have you noticed many changes in the show from a work perspective by the time that you came back, from either production or culture or anything along those sort of lines?
Oh, yeah. Because by the time I came back, we had Bruce Boxleitner, Claudia Christian, Richard Biggs, right? So, I mean, we had a different set of commanders in place.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose aside from Jerry Doyle, you were the only non-prosthetic wearer who would sort of return from the pilot.
That's right. Yeah.
Did it feel more confident, the show? Because, I mean, by this point, the show very much had a following, I would imagine.
It was... So I came back at the end of the second season, and it was already a show that had some big transitions, and they were working together. The crew was pretty much set, and they were working. They had a fabulous routine, and I always say this: I'm so grateful. A lot of these folks are still my friends. So not just the cast, but the crew, because we all work together. It never felt like actors have a different level ever. I'd
imagine the nature of the environment that you were shooting in kind of dictated that somewhat as well.
It comes from the top. I think the producers expected it. There was some wonderful, like John Flynn was one of my favorite humans, still is in the world, and he's just an amazing man. He was our director of photography, and your DP is consistent on the set every week with you, whereas the directors change out, you know, and your AD team changes out, your director's assistants change out. So the most consistent guy in front of you is the director of photography. And John Flynn had the most incredible crew. They were our rocks. And then we had each other as actors, you know, we're working together, and everybody on that show just had their own phenomenal contribution. And also Bruce's attitude, there was just he would take people aside. If somebody got a little too big for their britches, he wouldn't have it. You know, just not going to happen. Just like Nathan Fillion on Castle had to kind of like get control of the cast, say, we're not playing that game here. Yeah,
that's not how we roll on this show.
Together, you know. Yeah, so I felt a lot of support as well when I came back. I had a baby. A lot of changes had happened, and I had done some of the biggest stunt jobs I'd ever had in my life. You know, on working with Steven Spielberg, for instance. So, and I'd had a baby, and I'm coming back, and I have these pages of dialogue because it's all this exposition of where Lyta had been in the Vorlon home. What had happened to her? You know, they're not trusting her. Who the hell are you? And you know, what is happening here? So I would talk and talk and talk, and then Rick Biggs would go, and then I'd talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and then Bruce would say, and then what? And then talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. You know what I mean? Claudia,
my God, that's incredible, woman.
Yes, exactly. Really? Talk. It was a challenge to come back to.
And I mean, I'm noticing that
I had a lot of support. They were all great, and still, you know, people I love.
I mean, that leads quite neatly because I was a big fan of Babylon 5 at the time, and I did the whole thing. I was at the UK, the big UK convention between the third and the fourth season in Blackpool. In the UK, where although I learned many years later that there was a gigantic backstage shitstorm brewing at the time. I think that was around the time that Claudia left the show, and I think Joe had a few scripts from the next season accidentally thrown out by a cleaner in the hotel. So that was an interesting set of circumstances. But I'm just wondering what you feel the legacy of the show is now, because it seems to be one of the reasons why we've been, just to give a bit of context, we've been giving a lot of attention to Babylon 5 on our podcast recently, is that the show has started cropping up on the streaming services. So what that's resulted in is a whole new audience of people who thought that the Expanse and Game of Thrones were the first time this long-form storytelling had been doing. I'm just wondering what you feel now, over 20 years later, the legacy of Babylon 5 is in the culture.
Well, I think you kind of nailed it. It's that long form. Joe was the first to do it, and all the writers that followed have credited him with it, like Rocky O'Bannon with the new Battlestar, and they've all credited him with that gritty realism and having a 5-year arc. You have some standalone storylines, but then you've got these massive storylines that just continue to push through. And Joe had to do quite a lot of dancing with that, because not only did you have cast members who came and left, but you had we never knew if we had a season, the next season was going to happen or not. So that was really hard. But as far as a legacy, so I think that's the biggest one. A lot of what we expect and we love now in science fiction and fantasy is to see that long arc. We want to be carried along. We don't want just one-offs, right? The standalone episodes. We want to feel that we grow with this cast of characters and watch them grow, and what I think that also Joe did that was different was that nobody was 100% good or 100% evil. Just when you think you had somebody figured out, they'd do something completely different. You're like, what the hell's happening? What's going on? Wait a minute. That's
a huge legacy, because I mean, one of the things that you see now, particularly with shows like Game of Thrones, is people marveling at these character reversals. Oh my goodness, this character I used to hate, I now love. And when you think of the character arc, like Andreas's character and Peter Jurassic's character,
Peter's had a big one, right? And then you actually, even though Londo has been a complete dick for most of then suddenly you start to see some stuff that's happened. No spoilers, but there's a reversal by the end that there's a sympathy you can have for this character that was so you'd love to hate. He was such a great character. You love to hate him.
It's a tragedy as well. Do you watch yourself in things? How do you feel about seeing yourself on screen?
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's I don't think I'm unusual in that. I think there's a lot of actors that don't want to know.
A lot of people say that, and I think that us non-actors find that very hard to believe. I mean, Claudia said it as well. I'll tell you, if I was a TV actor or a movie actor, I would watch myself all day.
You would not.
I would watch nothing else but my own performances.
You would not. You know what happens is when you have to make a living doing what you do, it changes everything.
Of course.
And then you start to, as actors, we want to be, we want to be eminently hireable. We want to be castable. And what that translates into is a tremendous insecurity about anything you might consider a foible. And so, I have a lot of them. My face is very asymmetrical. My mouth is really weird. There's a lot of things about me that are not within these rigid standards. Now, though, I think that things have changed in Hollywood, and quirky is more celebrated, especially with men. It started male characters. The quirkier, the better. That's now, I think, happening a little more for women. You don't see quirky characters in the lead, but you do see more quirky female characters. It still sucks for women. This is why I started another business. So let's not sugarcoat it and say, oh, it's gotten so much better. It hasn't fucking gotten any better. It's not better. We have more platforms now for entertainment than ever before. But the percentage of women working has not. So the percentage in my union of women working has not changed. So that's everything, right? Because the platforms, like you said, have multiplied like crazy there. You can't see everything. But the percentage of working actors, working women, is not.
Right, so the opportunities relative to that growth is just way out of whack.
It still sucks completely. I mean, for beautiful young people, always. But once you hit a certain age, no.
But you talk about these.
I don't want to live like that. I want to have control over my.
Even now, the need to sort of supplement your primary career. I mean, just to relate that back to your earlier experiences. I mean, there's your stunt work on amongst others. I mean, you mentioned Spielberg. I mean, you were, I believe, Laura Dern's double on Jurassic Park, but also, I mean, notably, and I think most interestingly in some ways, is the Star Trek shows. I mean, you were in a very unique position, particularly with the controversy and the competition, at least from a fan's perspective, between Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5. You were very uniquely placed to view and understand the different dynamics between the shows, between the franchises. Could you talk to that?
Sure. I mean, they settled it. You know, the problem between Joe had taken the Bible for Babylon 5 over to Paramount. Paramount had it for a year. And then they're like, yeah, we're not going to do this show. And wouldn't you know, they developed Deep Space Nine. So they settled their differences. But what I saw was this. I had been a part of the stunt team in Next Generation, and our stunt coordinator was hired to create the action and a lot of the weaponry we created for Deep Space Nine. And so I was on the ground floor over there, while then I was cast on Babylon 5. It was really interesting, like you said, because they even had some characters named the same.
Yeah.
And they changed some of that, by the way. It was changed on the Deep Space Nine side.
Wow.
They didn't change Lyta, but they changed some of the other ones. So the budget was obviously a lot different for Paramount than it would be for a little independent show. We were shooting out in a converted warehouse in Sunland, which is miles and miles and miles away from civilization. But I love doing what I do, and I loved working on Star Trek. I had a membership to the gym on Paramount. I knew all the security guards. I had a uniform in every color in wardrobe, you know. And then I ended up in Deep Space Nine, mostly doubling a lot of guest stars. So I doubled Kira and I doubled Terry Farrell, Nana Visitor and Terry Farrell. But I also doubled a lot of the guest stars, which was super fun because you get to do different things for them.
And was the camaraderie similar between the two shows, or was it more business, more corporate over at Star Trek?
Right, very corporate at Star Trek. They also were working like terrible long hours, and they were exhausted, especially in the first couple of seasons. And finally, a crew member died on the way home, falling asleep at the wheel, and
God.
The union came out with a new rule saying you got to give the crew a turnaround as well. Now, the actors have what's called a turnaround, where you have to give them 10 hours off to go home and sleep before calling them back at the set. And if you don't, you're penalized. And they were just paying the actors all kinds of penalties for coming back. But finally the union said, no, you can't. People have to sleep. They have to get rest. You can't keep doing this. So, it was very different. In Babylon 5, they refused to pay any overtime or penalties. So we always wrapped on time. We always had our turnaround. When you have a budget of, a Mars bar, that's a candy bar in the United States, you get shit done fast.
Yeah, I imagine.
Bam, bam, bam. And you work it, so my favorite thing was Rick Biggs and I had a lot of storylines together. So we would go to his house, and his fiance would watch my baby, and he and I would go play Doctor and Telepathic Space. And we would rehearse our lines together, and, we rehearse and kind of come up with ideas and play with it, because there's no time to do it when you get to work. We had to just hit the ground running once we got to work.
Well, I'll tell you what, I am going to pitch Doctor and Telepath in Space to somebody, so I apologise. If you think that Deep Space Nine was a rip-off of Babylon 5, you wait until you see my new show. But I was just wondering, when you were working on Trek and B5 at the same time, did anyone on either side mention it?
Yes, one time, nobody mentioned it because I did not talk about it at all at Babylon 5, because they would have tried to put the kibosh on me. But I needed to make money. I was a single mom. I had to make the money I could make whenever I could make it. And I was paid peanuts for Babylon 5. It was, in my book, Pleasure Thresholds, I post my contract. It's printed in the book. You can see how much I was making in a year. It was ridiculous. I spent more in daycare for my child than I made on Babylon 5. So I had to keep working. And I was in costume as Dax, Terry Farrell's character, and I was by craft service, which is like the snacks table, coffee and snacks. I couldn't eat because Terry and Nana are skinny as rails, so I was just having coffee. I was standing there, and one of the producers, I won't say who, saw me, sidled up to the table, kind of unobtrusive. He's looking around a little bit, checking to see if anyone's noticing. And then he leans into me and he goes, "I love you on Babylon 5." And then he disappeared.
I thought you were going to say he sidled over, did the Psycor signal, and then just wandered away. Oh, that's amazing.
I was like, what? What just happened?
Wow. I was wondering, I mean, all of these franchises, I mean, we haven't even, I mean, many we haven't even mentioned, you know, Evil Dead, for example. Are there any franchises that you'd like to be a part of or would have liked to have been a part of that you didn't get an opportunity to from a fan perspective?
Just, you know, Game of Thrones. I mean, I would have ridden a dragon naked. I'd do anything. You know, I love that stuff so much. Harry Potter, I love that stuff so much. So at this point in my life, really, I would love to be able to tell those stories. And that's always something I've loved to do, to science fiction and fantasy. I am a total nerd. And so those stories, in fact, I don't think it's any mistake that I ended up in science fiction and horror, because I grew up on Star Trek and Dark Shadows.
Oh, awesome.
And I used to play them with my Barbies. And I made the old Barbie always into the Klingon, and I'd have like little saran wrap and tinfoil dresses to be the uniforms for my fancy doll and be Star Trek. You know, I was into it. So I'm sure that's why my career has gone the way it's gone. Yeah.
And sort of, I mean, you're sort of, I suppose, in some ways, working in fandom now. I'm just wondering what your sort of journey to that was around your experiences with conventions, and I suppose the ever-growing sort of business of fandom as well. Have you been active in the convention circuit over the years, or have you sort of dipped in and out of it? What have been your sort of general experiences and observations of that world?
I probably do 2 conventions a year, maybe 3. I'm happy to do them. I also just don't want to oversaturate the market with me. You know, it's like I feel that's a limited resource, so I don't want to blow it. And so yes, I have spent a fair amount of time with fans, and I am a fan, so I get it. And I have shows that I love, and I want to hang out with those actors. You know, I mean, I have the same thing. The only difference is that I have a little bit of an inroad. You know, I have an inroad to the behind the scenes, and I get to meet people like Nathan Fillion. He's adorable. And sometimes I get to hang out with some of these people. So what I think I have to offer to fellow fans now with what I'm doing is I can bring some of that to them. So when we're on a trip, like Jonathan Frakes joined us in Hawaii for our evening manta swim. I mean, when does that happen, right? You're going ziplining with Aaron Douglas from Battlestar, or, you know, so I've had some really fun times with the people that I know behind the scenes that I can pull in. When we were in London, I had 2 of the Harry Potter actors join us for our day when we went to the studio tour. In New Zealand, I've got connections. I can't say who, but I have behind the scene connections there too. And depending on who's available, because that's always a tricky bit with an actor or anyone working in the film, so that they'll show up or someone else might show up, but we'll have, so that you get to be you get to be at the cool kids table. I grew up not being a cool kid, so I really like the cool kids table. You know, let's do that.
Well, I mean, as we wrap things up, thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And if you could just remind our listeners how they can find the Adventure Quest details, but also if you could just mention any other sort of websites or activities or any social media or anything else that you want to draw their attention towards.
Questretreats.com is my business right now. I'm branching this out, and I've got a lot of great ideas. Claudia Christian and I are writing a book together, and so keep an eye on that. Well, I have a Facebook page. There's a Patricia Tallman page on Facebook. I have a Quest Retreats page on Facebook as well. It's just about travel, and obviously about the retreats as well. And then my Twitter handle is @PatriciaTallman. And Instagram is @quest.retreats, the numeral 4 nerds.
Excellent. And I'll post links to all of these on our show notes as well. So just look down and click on the link on your phone when you see this. Again, thank you so much, Patricia, for your time. You've been so generous. It's been absolutely
you're so sweet. I really appreciate it. No, I really do. And I can't wait to come back to New Zealand and say hi to everybody.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the second part of this week's show, where I am very lucky to be joined by actress, writer, singer, and addictions advocate Claudia Christian. Thank you so much for being with me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Both my absent co-host and I are big fans, and I'm not afraid to admit that this is a real thrill.
Thank you.
I mentioned earlier, it's great to see sort of in the background on the video call your gorgeous kitchen, because one of the features of your autobiography that we'll be talking a little bit about today is your love of cooking and entertaining, and I just want to know, is that still the case? Do you still like to hold court and have people over for such events?
I do, and I actually have a cookbook coming out any day now with my writing partner Morgan Grant Buchanan publishing it. So I wrote it with a wonderful friend of mine, Mark Michel, and he lives in Pennsylvania, and he has cerebral palsy. So we wrote a cookbook for gamers that include easy recipe for people with physical handicaps. And we have a combination, it's called Snack Hacks. We have a combination of recipes. So we have my hacks that I've been doing for the last, God knows, since I was 16 when I moved out. So I've been cooking for myself and my friends forever. And then Mark's recipes as well, everything from his mom to his own special recipes. And we make things fast and healthy, or fast and not so healthy, but we have a combination, plus lots of stories about my voiceover career, all the games I've been in. I interviewed some esport players and some voiceover actors and actresses. So it's going to be a really great book. And during that whole process of writing the book, of course, I was testing all the recipes. So my lucky friends came over a lot. In fact, I had the gals from Babylon 5 over, Mira and Pat Tallman. So that was fun. We did that twice. And I just love to cook. As a matter of fact, what little you can see of the kitchen is basically I took 6 rooms in one house that I found this beautiful house, but it looked horrible when you walked inside. And then I decided just to rip down all the walls, take off the roof, and build a kitchen. So I basically have a kitchen that is surrounded by a little bit of house. That's what I have. That's what I live in.
So that priority hasn't changed.
I have a bedroom and a bathroom, but my house is mostly just kitchen because I love to cook.
Psychologists say that you're either naturally a guest or a host, and it sounds to me like you very much fall into the latter of those categories.
I'm very much a host. It's the way I show my affection and love for people as I cook for them.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the B word, Babylon 5 earlier on. Now, I mean, one of the reasons that we're doing this section on our show this week is that there seems to be, as somebody who's part of the quote fan community, there seems to be been very much a resurgence of interest in Babylon 5 over the last 18 months or so. I think largely due to the fact that the show's now available on streaming for the first time, so it's finding a new audience, which is wonderful. But I mean, long-time listeners will know both my absent co-host and I are both big fans of Babylon 5, and also card-carrying fans of The Hidden as well, that wonderful 80s sci-fi gem. I'm hoping to sort of not just talk to you about those topics, but also about your book Babylon Confidential, a little bit about the work that you're doing that has come out of your experiences as outlined in the book. But just to get started, you got into acting through modelling, I believe. Could you tell me a little bit about the transition and your early days and experiences in that world?
I wasn't really a big, a successful model at all. I was picked up by a couple of photographers when I was living in Laguna Beach and asked to model for them, and then I started doing local things, a couple, newspapers, magazines. I really didn't want to be a model. I was just trying to make enough money to, get out of my house, to move out very young. So I was working numerous jobs, modeling just being one of them. Eventually, I saved up enough money to do what I really wanted to do, which was to move to Los Angeles and start my acting career, which I did. So I don't really have many, great memories of modeling. It's basically just stand there and do this and do that. I mean, I was kind of a natural at it because I I'm an actress, so I knew how to act like a model. But I certainly didn't like the obsession with weight and the obsession. It wasn't very creative to me.
So you mentioned the fact that the pressures around, I suppose, body image as well, and I'm just wondering that now in the sort of the age of the Me Too movement, do you feel that it would be that your experiences in those early sort of formative days of acting would be different now than they were then, or do you think that? How much do you think things have changed from your observances?
Oh, I definitely don't think that nowadays there are managers who weigh you when you come into their office, which is what I experienced. Wow. My first manager used to have a scale in her office, and she would weigh me. I also went to, now you got to understand, I was 5'9" and probably, nothing. I weighed like 120 pounds. I was just a stick. And I went to New York to meet with a bunch of agents, and two of them actually said, well, you could lose 10 pounds. And I thought, I was so skinny that I didn't know where I was going to.
What can I lose?
Where was I going to lose weight? I was so tiny. I was just a slip of a thing, and I was so tall, and I had grown so quickly that I had no weight on me. So I thought that was pretty absurd. And to really, show the absurdity of it, I was traveling with a photographer, and even she said to the agent, she said, "This is crazy. You're insane." But that's what people wanted. I think it's changed enormously. I actually rented my house out yesterday. I sometimes rent out it for photo shoots and things like that. And there was a plus size and smaller size models here that were doing some clothing shoots, and it was wonderful to see with shape. And I think that's great, that especially with the pressure on young girls to look a certain way, that we have to be more inclusive from now on. And actually I should include boys in there too, because the numbers of eating disorders amongst young boys is climbing. And it's staggeringly sad. You've got enough stuff going on when you're growing up that you shouldn't have to deal with being loved for what you look like. You should be loved for who you are and what you are.
Yeah, and one of those sort of relatively early acting experiences was obviously on the sci-fi movie The Hidden that we mentioned earlier on. I was just wondering if you. I'd like to talk about your experiences on that film a little bit, but I was just wondering sort of if and when you became aware of the fact that that movie had found an audience, because it's a film that to this day still comes up mentioned with great affection in the fan community. Yeah. And I would imagine that was probably one of the earliest sort of experiences perhaps that you had with fandom. Well, just talk to me a little bit about your experiences making that film, and also what your feelings are about it finding an audience, and what your feelings about that film are now.
Well, I think that The Hidden was way ahead of its time. I know everybody says that, it's such a cliche, but the film really had some interesting themes that ended up being sort of nicked years later, decades later, in a Denzel Washington film.
Fallen. Yes. I remember making that connection when I saw that film.
Yeah, and I think that it was a great experience for me. I had some funny things happen during that shoot, and I loved working. I know this sounds horrible, but I really enjoyed working with all the guns and everything, because it was just I don't know, it was just fun.
Playtime.
For me. Guns aren't fun, but when they're playtime, I shouldn't even say that, but I had a really good time being such a badass, and it was. I guess I started noticing that frat boys, like college kids, started writing to me and saying that they watched The Hidden, and then I did a film called Hexed after that, and so people started quoting lines from that, and I started getting a taste of, I guess, what would be called recognition pretty early on, because my very first job was on Dallas. And believe it or not, even though I had a tiny little job on Dallas, a tiny role, that show was so popular that I got fan mail for that tiny.
Oh, I think it's very difficult for anybody under 40 to appreciate the cultural phenomena of that show.
Oh, yeah, it was huge. So imagine I went from Dallas to Falcon Crest, which was also massive, to Behringer's, which I starred in. I was one of the regulars on that series. And then I went straight into Clean and Sober, and with Michael Keaton and Morgan Freeman, big stars, even, So it kind of built. And The Hidden was really, I think, my first feature. So it was nice. I've never been, you would say, famous enough to have it be annoying. I've only been famous enough to have it be really sweet when people recognize me. So I think there's a huge difference between that. I'm a working actress since 1983 in TV and film, and people say, "Hey, I saw you in that Seagal film, or I saw you on Criminal Minds, or I saw you on this," and that's enough recognition. That's great.
I think it's interesting from a viewer's perspective as well. I think that a lot of those early appearances of yours, Clean and Sober specifically, and The Hidden, and also Quantum Leap as well, where I think that probably had a great help to your prominence as well, because you got to be featured on the opening credits of that show.
Yeah.
There was a clip from your episode there, and that must have been a nice little sort of lottery win. And what I feel from a viewer's perspective that had is kind of an accumulative effect of recognition. So by the time I sat down and watched and saw you on Babylon 5, I was like, it's her. I know her, and I think that was probably a good place to be there. What were your experiences like on Quantum Leap? I'm just wondering what was working with Scott Bakula like, and did you feel that had an impact with the sort of, I suppose, the sweet placement that you got on the opening titles as well?
I had forgotten that they used me in the opening titles. I think it was because it was such a beautiful episode. The Jean-Pierre Dorléac made that incredible dress for me. The costumes were incredible. Scott Bakula was lovely. It just had a really cool noir feeling to it, and it was, as most people know, it was based on Casablanca. So that had that whole feeling. It was a good experience. I can't have, I don't really have any specific memories other than being on a slant board, because my dress was so tight I couldn't sit. So you had to lean back. Like in the old days, they had these slant boards that actresses would lean up against because you're sewn into your costume.
Wow,
so you can't, you're just walking like Jessica Rabbit.
My goodness.
And it was incredible. It was literally sewn onto me, and it was fun. It was, it was fun playing dress up when you're that age.
Do you? How do you feel about watching yourself?
I don't do it. I've blogged about this before. I finally sat down and watched the first 2 seasons of Babylon 5, and I blogged about it, and then life got in the way, and I stopped. So I've never watched season 3 and 4 that I was in. I've never watched the movies. I saw Hexed and Clean and Sober. I've seen some of my films. True Rights, I saw that. I went to some screenings. The Seagal film I saw, the Half Past Dead. Horrible film. No, it's a good film. No, it's good for what it is.
Everything has its place. How does that work from the perspective of like personal appearances and conventions and things? Do you find yourself a lot of the time in the interesting position of people knowing, I suppose, an element of your work more than you do?
Yeah, absolutely, especially with Babylon 5. I don't know when somebody will refer to an episode or something. I don't remember. It was 25 years ago. And as we all know, I had a drinking problem, so I killed a lot of brain cells. So I don't think that I get lost with all the subtext into the shadows and this and that, and I'm like, okay, whatever you read into it, baby, it's all yours. For me, they were beautifully written scripts. It was one of my favorite characters to play of all time. But I don't sit down and binge watch things that I'm in. I would feel very self-conscious doing that. And it's not that I'm uncomfortable at all watching myself at all. And I'm not that kind of vain actress saying, oh, the lighting is bad in this, unless it's extraordinarily bad. It's not that at all. It's just I have too much to do. Once it's done in my mind. The job is done, and I'm moving on.
So how did the B5 job come about? I'm just curious as to how much you knew about it going in. Had you seen the original pilot? Were you aware that you were, I suppose, arguably replacing another actor? Could you tell me a little bit about those early days experiences on Babylon 5?
Not really. I had heard that the actress that was being replaced was too short for the lead guys. That's what I heard. And they were looking for a tall woman. I also heard that the model Iman was up for the role, and that she was a shoo-in and she was going to get it. But I don't even know if any of this is true. I literally went up for it in the afternoon. They told me to come back. I met Jerry Doyle. We did the scene again. Series was mine. It happened really quickly. I don't think there was a lot of deliberation or contracts or reading for the studio or anything like that, like you normally do. In television, you usually go to network. It's called going to network, and you have to go back, and it's a big deal, and you're up against the finalists. This happened really quickly. So it was really up to me to figure out if I wanted to commit to 5 years. Because at that point I thought I'm going to be a film star. I just worked in all these amazing things, and I'm going to be a movie star. Of course, Babylon 5 ended up being an absolutely gorgeous experience. I have some of the best friends I've ever met in my life are still my friends from that show. So it all worked out the way it's supposed to work out.
I think it's interesting as well that you allude to that sort of historical division between television and film. I think it's fair to say that's not really the case anymore.
You have to understand that when for instance, when I played Faye Dunaway's daughter in a movie of the week, a Columbo movie, that was a huge deal that she was doing TV. That was like taboo. And now, of course, you see Nicole Kidman on TV and everybody on TV. So it really, Glenn Close, there is no difference, but the quality has changed as well. Obviously, the writing, the production values, everything has changed. So I'm actually quite pleased that I was in this industry before cell phones. That I think is the most viable piece of experience that I took away from this, because I made so many amazing friends. And nowadays, actor and actor on their cell phone, so you never get to know anybody. You don't talk to anybody. So it's not that same experience where you actually get to know people over years at a time. It was we were all great friends, and we all had a lot of laughs all day long, and it was a great experience. It was just a wonderful experience.
I was also wondering what the environment was like.
22 episodes a year, and the humans only worked 13 hours. Star Trek was working 20 hours. The aliens, on the other hand, it was exhausting for them. They came in at 3 o'clock in the morning and sometimes wrapped, at the same time as the humans. So that's a whole different story. Because we cost half the budget of a normal sci-fi show, we had to get everything in at a certain time, and they really didn't like going overtime. So that was kind of a big deal, and that's how we saved so much money, was by not going overtime. So, if I had a 6 a.m. call, I was wrapped by 6:30, 7 p.m. every night. So that's, I think to the average person hearing about a 13-hour day sounds long, but to an actress, it doesn't sound long at all. I worked on films sometimes that, you work an 18-hour day. It's just par for the course. If they're willing to pay overtime or it's low budget, yeah.
Okay, as way of transitioning into a bit of talk about your non-profit work, I just want to start with talking about Babylon Confidential, which I read recently, and it was upon completing that I made contact with you. First of all, could you just tell me a little bit about when you started writing that and what the sort of the motivation was behind it?
I wrote that book because I found a method for my alcohol use disorder called the Sinclair method, and I felt that it would be absolutely selfish of me not to spread the word about this method, because it worked so well and I knew it could save millions of lives. So I wrote a book, and the publisher wanted to put Babylon in the title because that's what I was most well known for, which is fine. And of course you have to put some sex and Hollywood stories in there to sell the book. But really the impetus was to talk about the Sinclair method. And then after that came out, it got great reviews. But, it wasn't a New York Times bestseller or anything. So I thought, wow, what am I going to do now to spread the word? I guess I'll make a documentary. And that's when I made so the book came out in 2012, I believe. The documentary came out in 2014, One Little Pill, which people can see for free. Or go to the site onelittlepillmovie.com, onelittlepillfilm.com. And that's a very digestible, less than an hour long documentary that shows the science behind this method and also real people on it. And then after I made that, around 2013, so right after the book, I also was thinking, I better open a nonprofit organization, because making a movie is great, making YouTube videos is great, writing a book is great, but now we need a website where people can go. So that's really how everything went. And I have to do a huge shout out to my sci-fi fans, genre fans in particular, because they really helped raise the funds to finish One Little Pill. I put a lot of my own money into it, but they came through when I really needed it. So that was extraordinary. They've pretty much supported everything I've done. That's the amazing thing about sci-fi fans is their loyalty, their just stick-to-itiveness, their passion. They don't leave you behind. They don't. Even when I was noodling around with making music, they would buy those CDs and they would comment and go, "No, you're great," even though I'm like, okay, they're not great, but it, it's something that I wanted to do. So they are an extraordinary group of people, sci-fi fans. They really are.
In regards to the Sinclair method, now, the thing I found interesting about that is that on the surface, it's extremely counterintuitive because, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to be very layperson here, but I think it would be great if we could maybe say it to the listeners a little bit, is my understanding of the Sinclair method is that you are still able to have a drink. And that for a lot of people, that's the barrier. It's that absolute cutting off and then having to deal with the pressures of being surrounded by the imagery, the iconography, the advertising, the social aspects of alcohol, which often drive people back to, the traditional falling off the wagon. But my understanding with the Sinclair method is that you take the medication before you drink, and then you are able to enjoy a drink, but being able to sort of stop at a reasonable point. Is that a fair layperson assessment for it? Could you just provide a little bit of more specific clarity around the Sinclair method?
Yeah, for a layperson, I would just tell them it's Pavlov's dog in reverse. So what you're doing is you're taking this opiate blocker and you wait an hour so that it's in your brain and bloodstream, and then you engage in the behavior you wish to stop or decrease. So in my case, it was drinking. But if you're a gambler, you would use it for gambling. So you have the opiate blocker, you wait an hour, it's in your system, and then you take your drink, and instead of the alcohol producing this massive rush of endorphins and then making your neural pathways even more pronounced, the naltrexone, in my case, opiate antagonist that they use in the US, the naltrexone blocks these endorphins from sitting back on the opiate receptors. So in layman's terms, I would say the more you do a behavior on an opiate antagonist, the less you're going to want to, the less reward or reinforcement you're going to get for that behavior. So yes, you do lose interest in alcohol. You can lose interest quickly, like some people on TSM, or you could take a decade like I did before I finally quit drinking. I was still social drinking up until the end of last year. So it's really up to the individual. Which way you want to do. I think psychologically, to give somebody the freedom, say it's not an abstinence-based program, which scares the crap out of teenagers and 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. They're like, how am I going to be sober for 60 years, 70 years? So this is really ideal for people. Also, it's a preventative method, because if you're 17 years old and you have alcoholism in your family and you're already binge drinking and alcohol is adversely affecting your life, you can start taking naltrexone before you go into high-risk situations and prevent yourself from developing an alcohol use disorder. I mean, if I had that opportunity, 10 years before I finally found it, I would have gladly taken the medication and avoided the really latter parts of my miserable condition, because in my late 30s, I definitely, if I would have started it then, it wouldn't have taken me until, a couple years, 5 years later or whatever, to find naltrexone. So I'm just happy that it's available now for people to use as a prevention, or also if they're in the middle of their alcohol use disorder, or even if they're in the chronic stages, they can take it. It can be for anybody who, I've given it to actors who you wouldn't necessarily say have a problem. They're just misusing alcohol. Maybe they're going through a divorce, or they've gained too much weight from too many beers or wine, and they want to cut down. So that you can use it in that manner as well. You don't have to identify as an addict. And identifying as an addict is something that very few of us want to do. I made a whole life of it. So I don't care what people call me. You can call me anything you want. I think it's derogatory and shameful and stigmatizing to call somebody a drunk or this or that. But I don't care what people call me, because I've come out of the closet screaming because I want to share this information. So to me, it doesn't matter. But there's a lot of people out there that don't want to label themselves. And that's fine. You can say, you know what, I want to reduce in its form. That's what the Sinclair method is. It reduces the harm from drinking by giving you back the off button. So in other words, if you start drinking and you can't stop, this will give you back the ability to stop. So you'll be normal again. You'll be the person having a pint of beer, not 17 pints of beer.
Now, one thing I'd like to point out our listeners towards is Claudia's TED Talk, which is a really succinct and sort of interesting way of absorbing this information. One thing I was wondering, though, was, and I realise that this is a big part of your work, is, as you say, kicking the door open and screaming to the world about this, but why do you think this isn't more well known? Because, I mean, whose agenda are we talking about here, do you think?
Well, we're talking about a generic medication that and a method that you can do in the privacy of your own home without any therapy, without any rehab facilities, without anybody involved. I did it without even a doctor, which I don't recommend to people because we have found recently, we just did research, and I know just anecdotally from my own experience over the past decade that people do a lot better with a supportive doctor when they're on the Sinclair method. But to be honest, here you have C3 Foundation, where you can download your drink log, your app for your phone. You get a PDF of the book. You get all the information you want for free. And then you just go to a doctor and get your naltrexone prescription. And lo and behold, you're curing yourself of alcohol misuse. Or you can spend up to $3,000 a day and go to some swanky place and then relapse a couple months after you get out of that place. Because let's face it, the multi-billion-dollar revolving door business of the rehab industry is not only massively ineffective, but they're making such great amounts of money that they don't want something like the Sinclair method to be utilized. It's a two-pronged problem. First of all, you have to drink on it. That means you can't do this in an inpatient facility unless they set up a bar. Okay? And I don't know how many inpatient facilities are going to do that. Second of all, so you've got that aspect of it. And also it really, really works, and it works very well. 80% long-term success rate. These facilities depend financially on people failing, on them failing the individual. So when you hear about a Britney Spears going to rehab 8 times, you laugh about it. It's not funny. That's about $1 million. Seriously. And you think about somebody who's got a child who's drinking to excess and killing themselves, and that parent mortgages their home to send their kid to some swanky $50,000 rehab that claims it can fix their kid, and the kid gets out and relapses a month later. And it's so ineffective because they're not treating it like what it is. It's a brain disorder, or you want to call it a disease, whatever you want to call it. It has all of the functionality of a disease. It's progressive and it can kill you. So why would you be treating it with talk therapy? I'm not saying that talk therapy doesn't work for some issues of drinking, but the biological issue of addiction cannot be undone by prayer or talk because it's not reasonable. Your brain changes. If you look at brain scans of somebody pre-alcoholism and post, the brain changes. So you're not going to be able to fix that with Tai Chi or equine therapy or drinking green juice. That would be like me saying to you, you know what, you have a heart condition. Well, just go to the meeting and talk about your heart condition. That'll help you.
That logic isn't applied to any other medical issues. You
wouldn't use a fellowship for your diabetes. You know, the 12-step programs are a fellowship. They're not a treatment. They're not a medical treatment. And they know that. They say that. And I'm not dissing the value of any 12-step program or any recovery program, smart recovery, moderation management, whatever you use, that's fine. But a lot of people need a medication in addition to therapy or just by itself to fix the biological problem of addiction. So that's where naltrexone and nalmefene come in handy. And for people who can't tolerate those, there's acamprosate and baclofen and gabapentin. There's no reason why we are not caught up to science when it comes to treating addiction. And that's what my work entails. I want to take back the treatment industry for alcohol use disorder because it's unfair to individuals right now what they're doing. And it's just a massive ripoff. If they had to publish their success rates, they would be closed in 5 seconds. But all this, anonymous and this and that, and we don't keep track of people after 3 months. Of course you don't keep track of people after 3 months. They could be dead after leaving your rehab facility. I mean, seriously. I mean, when it's a real dire circumstance, but thankfully it's changing. The whole United States will be covered in the next couple of months with TSM. All of Australia is covered. All of Canada is covered. So I'm just thrilled that this has happened in the past 5.5 years. Not to pat myself on the back, but
I mean, obviously this was a very, very powerful, motivating experience for you. And I'm just wondering what your personal experience was like at the time. Like you mentioned these other methods, and I think it's very diplomatic of you to say that, you know, different strokes for different folks, essentially. But clearly you had been through yourself. You had your own personal experience with some of these other methods of treatment. What was the eureka moment? What was the experience like of trying the Sinclair method for the first time and the realization of, oh my goodness, dare I believe this is actually going to work?
It was really scary. First of all, to address the inclusiveness of treatment, our logo for my nonprofit is Options Save Lives. And that is my true core belief, that you have to have options because everybody drinks for different reasons. Everybody is wired differently. You have to have as many options as possible to combat this horrible, horrible situation where 3.3 million people die every year. To answer your question in regards to my aha moment, I was really scared, but I knew that the cravings would come back. I had gone from a light drinker to a medium drinker to a heavy drinker. Then I stopped drinking altogether. That caused the alcohol deprivation effect, and I became a binge drinker. And the binges got progressively worse. Every time I would relapse, they would get progressively worse. I was completely out of control when I would be drinking, and it scared the hell out of me. Traditional rehab didn't work. AA meetings didn't work. I tried everything, hypnotherapy. I went to psychotherapy. I knew that something was wrong with my brain. I knew that I had changed because I understand compulsive behaviors because when I was a kid, I used to count. I had OCD and I was a counter. So I understand what a mental illness feels like, what that feels like when you're out of control. A compulsive behavior. I experienced it as a child. I happened to outgrow that, so I was fortunate about that. But in this situation, I knew it felt like my OCD. I was being compulsive about alcohol, and I was not in control. So when I read up on TSM and I finally ordered the medication, and it finally came, I had 3 months or so of sobriety under my belt. And so when I tried that pill, I was taking a huge chance, but I knew that at that point I was already craving alcohol. It was only, a few months of abstinence and white knuckling again. The compulsive thoughts of alcohol were starting to rear their ugly heads again. The honeymoon period of sobriety was over with, and I was starting to Jones. And so the pills arrived, and I bought a bottle of wine, and I went home, and I did it, and it was remarkable. The very first time I took it, I didn't even finish the glass, and that was some people have that. It's kind of it's not a placebo effect. It's more of it's just an immediate responder, we call it. So I was in that regard, I was definitely lucky. And then, I slowly drank a couple times more that week and slowly. And then about 3 to 4 months into the Sinclair method, that's when I had my real aha moment. Because as I mentioned in my TEDx talk, I was driving by this billboard with a big glass of red wine on it. And that always triggered me to either want to drink or to be angry that I couldn't drink. And that particular day, I drove by it and I thought, oh, that's a billboard.
There's your litmus test.
Yeah, there's a billboard, and I had no response to the glass of alcohol that was on that billboard. And I've said it before, I pulled over and cried because I realized my brain was fixed. That's the difference. You can be abstinent, but as long as you are white knuckling, just like the guy who brought AA to America, Bill W., he died begging for whiskey. And I didn't want that life. I wanted to not think about alcohol. I didn't want alcohol ruling my life, whether I was drinking or not drinking. And so that's the state of mind of being in forced abstinence, the white knuckling, the dry drunk, whatever derogatory term you want to call it. It's miserable. It's a miserable state to be. Some people are unbelievably happy sober and they're free. I was not a sober person. I was miserable. I isolated. I couldn't see my friends. I couldn't go to a bar. I couldn't go to restaurants. I couldn't throw parties. I couldn't throw dinners. So that's the difference of quality of life. That's the difference the Sinclair method made in my life.
You have a life. I mean, it seems to me. I mean, one of the things that resonated with me very much when you were talking about your experiences with alcohol was this idea of the monster, the idea of this voice, this dark part of your own personality that practices psychological sabotage. And I think everybody has that. Everybody has that monster to some degree or another, to different degrees of destruction. One thing I was very curious about upon finishing reading Babylon Confidential was, did the monster return when you were writing the book? Did that voice, were you concerned that maybe that that the very act of writing the book and re-exploring these things could have some effect?
It's interesting because I definitely have experienced throughout. No, to answer your question, writing was cathartic. It was necessary, because what happens when you have a compulsive behavior or something that really could destroy your life and has caused great pain in your life, the human brain has a tendency to romanticize it or to soften it. So for me to write about what really happened, that I really was sitting on the side of the street with a brown paper bag drinking vodka on a busy street, just facing that and writing it down for everybody to read was huge for me, because there was no shame. I was not full of shame. I was full of horror. And I wanted to show people how destructive this process is when you get addicted to alcohol, and how lonely it is and how painful it is. So to answer your question, no, it wasn't, it didn't the monster didn't come back. The monster did try to poke itself back in my head throughout the years when really emotional things came up, triggers, individuals being hurt, all that stuff. I still had the knee-jerk reaction of, I want to drink. Even though now that I've had so much time behind it to look back, I realize that those were not genuine cravings for alcohol at all. Those were knee-jerk reactions to being hurt or traumatized. So that's what I always tell people when I talk about mindful drinking. I say, you have to identify if it's a craving for alcohol or if it's just like, oh, I walk by that pub that I love so much, I want a beer. That's a memory. That's just a memory. That's something that stimulates you. That's not a genuine craving for alcohol. And I think people, they lose that perspective. Then again, all I've done is study alcohol drinking for the past 10 years. With people that are every level of alcohol drinking. So I would say I have a lot of thinking to do on it. The monster is definitely dead. The monster is gone. She's out of my life. She's been gone for a long time. And I'm really thankful about that. I think people who cut themselves, maybe people who are anorexic, which I also experienced a bit of when I was a teenager, I think those people will understand what it feels like to not be in control, to not be in control of your body, of your mind. And it's a really scary thing.
If there's anybody listening to this show who sort of, identifies with any of those things and has tried other methods and thinks that maybe TSM might be something for them, what should be their first step? Where should they go? What websites and resources should they look for?
Very first place to go is, if you live in the UK or Europe, you go to C3 Foundation Europe. If you live in America, you go to c3foundation.org. If you live elsewhere in the world, you can go to either one and get comparable information. Joanna at C3 Europe has more information about how to deal with the NHS, for instance, in the UK, and also dealing with nalmefene. We don't deal with nalmefene in the US because they don't prescribe it here. So if you're in Finland or whatever, just choose one of the sites and download the information that you need. You can get your drink log, as I said. You can also contact me directly through the site. We also have coaching sessions, if you want to do a half hour or an hour. You can find your doctor through the C3 Foundation site. So you just put your country in or your city or whatever, and it'll come up. I definitely would encourage people to watch One Little Pill if they think they have a problem, because it'll explain the science behind it. It's very palatable, easy to digest, and they can see if this treatment would be good for them. Just a note, if you are on opiates currently, or if you're addicted to opiates, you cannot take naltrexone. You'll go into immediate withdrawal. So that's one thing for people to keep in mind.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Claudia. I really appreciate it. And I was just wondering if there's any other social media or any other websites or resources that you'd like to make mention of at this point before we finish things up?
Well, the film, One Little Pill, film.com. On Twitter, I'm Claudia Lives, but C3 Foundation has a Twitter account as well. I'm on, I'm just trying to think. I mean, most important, if somebody's suffering, I would go to c3foundation.org. If they want to know what I'm up to, what conventions I'm going to or anything, that's just claudiachristian.net. That usually has what games I'm coming out on and conventions, things like that. I have snack hacks coming out, so if people want to check out a really cool cookbook for gamers, I'm excited about that. Gods and Heroes is a Netflix series that I just recorded this year that'll come out next year. It's animated. It's really great. I play the goddess Hera.
Fantastic.
Morgan Grant Buchanan and I have another book coming out from Tor Macmillan, which will be out next year, tentatively called Bastards, which I'm really excited about. And I'm still working on my book about people on TSM called Journeys, and that should come out either this year or early next year.
Wonderful stuff. And I'd also just like to encourage listeners to check out Babylon Confidential as well. It creates a great context for a lot of the things that Claudia's talked about here. And also, I don't mean to be salacious here, but it's a page turner as well. So, I don't want to make it sound like you're going to be reading a medical pamphlet here, because you assuredly are not. This is not a lecture.
Lots of steamy Hollywood stories and stuff all like that. So I think I've never heard somebody say, "Oh, that was a boring read." They usually say they read it in one night.
Yeah. That was the thing. Is that I read it on my Kindle, and the little bar at the bottom of the Kindle that shows you how far through you were. Every time I'd look down, I'd be absolutely amazed at how far through that I'd got it, because it's a very compulsive read.
Thank you. Again,
thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I can vouch for Claudia's busyness, so I appreciate how.
We've been going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I think I lost my voice. I had the flu. Then I got a game. Then I got another one. Then I did League of Legends. Then I did World of Warcraft. Then I was like there. Then I was traveling. Then I came back. Then I was in Florida.
Oh, all this work and traveling. What a tragedy your life is.
Oh, yeah. And now I'm leaving. I'm leaving tomorrow to British Columbia to go to the Western Canadian Addiction Forum. So you caught me in the nick of time, and It's lovely to talk to you. Thank you for all your thoughtful questions, and to all of you fans out there, listen to Ivanova.
Yeah, all the best.
Thank you so much.
Okay, but you have a great day.
Bye.
Okay, so thanks again to Claudia and Patricia for joining us. We'll be back with a regular episode very soon. As is always the case, you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Chinstroker versus Punter. And you can also find us on Letterboxd at /punter and /Chinstroker. So see you soon for a regular ep. Thanks, guys.